That's right, y'all. It finally happened. I shaved! I'm just kidding. We have something equally as important to talk about today. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven. I'm your true champion, and boy, oh boy, do we have some awesome Digimon news to talk about. In case you guys didn't know, Bandai earlier today just announced that there will be modified game rules for the Digimon card game Card Fest events happening later this year in March. This is a pretty big deal, as Bandai is essentially using these upcoming tournaments as a way to test these modified game rules to maybe see if they should be implemented to the main game going forward. I want to stress right now, before we get into what the actual rules are, that these are not rule changes to the main game. These are just modified rules for these upcoming tournaments. They may or may not be applied elsewhere after the events have concluded, but I have no information at this time of that happening. If I see or hear anything about these becoming permanent, I'll be sure to let you know, but for now, only worry about them if you are playing in the upcoming Digimon card game fests. And the TLDR of all the rule changes, in case you're wondering or itching to find out what they are, is side decks and mulligans are now going to be included in the Digimon TCG. If you guys are excited not only for this breakdown of the new rules, but for potentially the new rules coming out, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. And be sure to let me know, how do you really feel about mulligans and side decks being added to the Digimon TCG down below in the comments? Let's get a discussion going down there. That's the basics, but I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty right now as to what Digimon mulligans and Digimon side decks look like. All right, y'all, here we are. I have the post pulled up of the actual announcement for the modified game rules. And before I get into anything, if anything I say in this video confuses you, or you want me to elaborate on anything, or ask me some questions, be sure to follow me over on Twitch. Link is down below, twitch.tv/TrueChampionSteven. I'm probably going live later today around 4 or 5 p.m. talking about the winners and losers of these modified game rules, the expected best side deck cards, the decks that really want a mulligan, the decks that don't really care about a mulligan, etc., etc. So if that sounds like a conversation you want to have, Twitch is the place to be to have that conversation with me. With that being said, let's get into this post right here. Starting off, we have, hello, Digimon Tamers. The Digimon Card Game Fest is a new event held in March 2022 to celebrate the Digimon card game with an exciting tournament and new exclusive fest prizes, which, by the way, in case you guys don't know, are literally Slash Andromon and Lilithmon. It's almost like Bandai watched my top 5 best Digimon cards video. These are my actual top 2, so I'm very excited for this event, not only to potentially play in the one in Miami, but also host or commentate the one in Texas. Modified gameplay rules will be tested for the main event as follows. So basically that means that any side decks that'll happen during Card Game Fest won't have the modified gameplay rules. I'm assuming for Card Game Fest store events in Europe, please confirm with the store that the following rules will be used. So that means in Europe, they will also be using the modified gameplay rules, and here they are. So starting off, we have the mulligan, and for any non-card game veterans out there, a mulligan basically means a redo of your opening hand in case there are cards in there you don't like, / cards in there you just don't want to use. Games like Vanguard, games like Pokemon, games like Magic the Gathering all have mulligans, but Digimon's mulligan is different than all of theirs. Here's how it works. After players have placed their security and drawn their starting hand, they may review their hand and mulligan. So that means it's an optional mulligan. You don't have to do it. Like in Pokemon, you have to mulligan unless you open a basic Pokemon. To mulligan, you place all cards in your hand to the bottom of your deck. So that means your security is still there. You do not shuffle and you do not replace your security cards. So that means whatever cards you're drawing after your mulligan, they won't be like fresh. So if you put cards away, those cards you'll not see again unless you play multiple copies of any of them throughout your deck. You draw 5 new cards from the top of your deck, and then subsequent mulligans are not permitted. So basically, here's how it works. You set your security, you draw your 5 cards. You don't like your 5 cards, put it at the bottom, draw 5 new ones. All right, that's your hand. Best of luck. So this feels like a very, for lack of a better word, unoptimized mulligan. In Card Fight Vanguard, you can literally take specific cards you don't want, put them on the bottom, and then draw like that specific number back. And then you shuffle, so that way any cards you want, you can actually put them back into your deck. So if there's any important one-ofs that you put to the bottom, you still have access to them. You don't have to like deck out potentially in order to see them. In Digimon, that's not happening. So I actually think this is a good thing for Digimon. I think the way we're doing mulligans actually leads to more decision making versus anything else. Let's say you're playing Jessamon and you have like your 2 rookies, your 2 megas, and a Sistermon, but you have no actual red champion. Do you really risk putting all 5 of those cards back to the bottom of your deck just to get a blind new 5? Potentially not, as you have a turn 1 and turn 2 play if anything goes wrong. This to me feels like a mulligan that cannot optimize or make inconsistent decks more consistent. It feels like a way to take absolutely unplayable hands and hopefully get a playable one. And that to me is the actual role a mulligan should play in any card game. So overall, I like this mulligan. I think it's the best way we could have introduced mulligan into Digimon without potentially like breaking what decks are good / what decks aren't good. I don't think deck building will change as a result of this mulligan. I just think it'll be a much smoother ride for people to actually get going in any single game. It will minimize the actual brick hands that players have, and that's a good thing. Side decks, however, are going to be a different story, as there's a lot going on here. So let's talk about side decks. Players will be permitted to bring their main deck of 50 cards and a side deck of up to 10 cards. So in games that have side decks, 10 to 15 is like the magic number. I'm pretty sure Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic all have 15. I'm not sure about Super. I want to say they have 15, but they probably have 10 because it's also a Bandai game. Side decks may include main deck and Digi-Egg cards. That's pretty obvious. You can include any kind of card in the game within your side deck, basically. The limit on copies of cards with the same card number that can be included applies to the total cards in your deck and side deck. So obviously, if you have 4 Agumon starter deck in your main deck, you can't then put like 1 more of them in your side deck just to put it in the middle of the game. There must be a maximum of 4 of those Agumon throughout your total main deck and side deck. If rules or effects change the limit on copies of cards that can be included, the limit applies to the total cards in both your deck and side deck. So obviously, Eosmon, you can play 50 in your main deck, but if you played 51 in your side deck as well, that is a no-go. So take that one out and play something else. The contents of the side deck are considered a secret area and should not be shown to the opponent. So just keep it in your deck box and then bring it out in between games. Both players should count out their side decks in view of their opponent to confirm how many cards are in there at the start of each match. Your side deck may be returned to a deck box for safekeeping, which must be kept on the table in view of both players. And I'm sure they're going to get into it later, but basically any cards you take out of your main deck must be replaced by cards in your side deck and vice versa. So there always needs to be 50 cards in your main deck and 10 cards in your side deck, no exceptions. After the end of each game in a match, players choose to swap cards into their deck from their side deck. The same number of cards must be swapped between each deck. The quantity of both decks must remain the same before and after siding, like I just said. Please keep the time between games to under 3 minutes. All preparation for the next game and exchanging of cards between main deck and side deck must be carried out within these 3 minutes. That's a pretty good metric to have, because you don't want games to become longer in Digimon, and you don't want to have to, when you're making a tournament, make your rounds an hour or like 10 plus minutes more than they were before, given that there are now side decking involved. Side decking should be a pretty easy thing to incorporate once you get used to it. Players may be penalized if a judge determines them to be time wasting between games. Slow play applies not only to actually playing, but also preparing for games as well. Before the start of each game, if a player has a side deck, they should present it to their opponent face down. The number of cards in their side deck is public information, but the player is now required to reveal how many cards were swapped between decks. Okay, so that's interesting. So obviously you can ask them, hey, how many cards at any point are in their side deck? If it's less than 10, that means they probably have more cards in their main deck than they should, but if it's equal to 10, that means they're good as long as their main deck is 50 cards. Players are not permitted to review their side deck contents during a game. Oh wow, so I can't like in the middle of my opponent's turn like remind myself what's in my side deck. It needs to be memorized, or I can only look at it during the actual in-between of games. That makes sense. You don't want to like accidentally like do something hinky where if you look at your side deck during a game, you might be able to like put the card in during the game versus only during the siding. So I think that's a good rule to have, but definitely an interesting one that I've never seen before, I don't think. End of the match, players must return their decks and side decks to their original states. Makes sense. So the way your deck was at the start of the match, it needs to be the same way when the match is over. If a player receives a game loss penalty prior to the start of the first game, players are not allowed to switch cards out of their side decks before the start of game 2. So if I'm starting off my match with an automatic game loss, it's not like we're going into a imaginary game 2 where game 1 actually happened. No. Side decking only happens when actual games are finished between opponents, not when game losses are awarded. And that's it. Those are all the rules for side decking in Digimon. But what's not going to be said here is like the potential of what these side decks could accomplish in this game. Let's talk about that for a second. Side decking in Digimon is potentially one of the most broken aspects of this game, and it will not only be complicated to master, but it'll also be kind of complicated to play against if you are looking to be competitive in this game, because given how generic Digimon is in terms of deck building, it's totally possible to play completely different engines in your side deck that you can incorporate seamlessly in games 2 and 3 depending on your matchup. Let me explain. Let's say I'm playing Yellow Hybrid for the Digimon Card Game Fest in the Set 7 format, and I'm playing as my main level 6s, the OG Seraphimon and the brand new promo Seraphimon. Well, I decide that after winning game 1, I want to change things up in game 2, and I take out all of my level 6s and put in 4 copies of Shine Greymon and 2 copies of Sakuyamon, and maybe even some copies of Susanamon if I wasn't already playing him. Now my opponent is expecting me to play a very recovery-based grind game, when in reality, I'm going to be playing a board wipe / board control game the entire time. That's a seamless transition from Yellow Hybrid to Shine Hybrid out of nowhere that your opponent now has to account for in games 2 and potentially account for in game 3, because you can always switch back / stay the same and the mind games of side decking can begin. The other obvious use of side decks is the use of tech cards or floodgates against very specific matchups or situations, like memory blockers for blue decks or decks that gain a bunch of memory, or even Digivolution reduction blockers like Cutemon or Gaussmon that can be utilized against the new hybrid decks of Set 7, because the level 5 hybrids have the ability to reduce their evolution cost if they're evolving on a hybrid already. I don't know where I sit in the camp of side decks being good or bad. I do find them interesting. I do like the idea of testing and trying out new things, but I don't like the idea of having to constantly overthink every little thing my opponent does during a match. So hopefully these Card Game Fest testing rounds will be a good test as to the validity of using a side deck and a mulligan in the Digimon TCG, and hopefully we keep what works and we get rid of what doesn't work. My guess is that side decks aren't going to be the greatest thing in the world, but mulligans, at least the way that they've described it here, are going to be pretty nice. So hopefully they keep that and get rid of the side decks, because it's probably just more trouble than it's worth. But who knows, maybe it ends up being a really nice inclusion that the community loves, but I can't see the future. And boom, there you guys go. That wraps up all of my thoughts for the upcoming rule changes for the Digimon Card Game Fest in the Digimon TCG. I think side decks and mulligans can add a lot of competitive potential, but they will also make the game drastically more complicated. But for some people, that'll be a fun challenge, and for some people, that'll be a needless thing that they now have to do versus what they were originally planning to for these events. Let me know what side of the coin you guys land on for this down below in the comments, and if you did enjoy this breakdown, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell with notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. But with that being said, I've been your true champion, Steven. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, and live well, and I will see you all next time. Peace.